The war didn't start with weapons. It started with laughter. For centuries, the Galactic Concord kept peace across the stars. A network of ancient species governed by an alliance older than Earth's pyramids. Among them were the Eldari, a race so old and revered their words were treated as universal truth. They had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. Their wisdom shaped policy, controlled conflict, and restrained ambition. And their warning was clear. Do not provoke the humans. Not because humans were stronger, not because they had advanced technology. No, their ships were average, their politics unstable, and their biology unimpressive. But the Eldari spoke of something deeper, something buried in the human psyche, a trait the other races didn't understand and feared even less. A relentless will to win, even if it meant burning everything down. But wisdom doesn't last forever. The galaxy grew arrogant. The new generation of species, the Etran, the Zoran, the silken-voiced Lumasari, all dismissed the Eldari's caution as superstition. Humans were chaotic, emotional, impulsive. They weren't a threat. They were a curiosity, an inferior species with a planet cluttered in ancient ruins and digital rot. So the stars laughed. And in a conference orbiting the twin moons of Raltora, a young Zoran ambassador, slick-scaled and draped in arrogance, mocked the humans in front of 12 star-faring nations. He said Earth was a dying sphere of fire and fiction, that humanity worships war like religion, that if they ever overstepped, they would be cleansed like a viral strain. It was broadcast. Millions watched, including Earth. That's when things began to change. Earth didn't respond with threats or diplomacy. The United Earth Coalition, fractured and chaotic a year before, suddenly unified. Old enemies signed peace treaties. Military factions merged. Drafts were enforced. Satellites went dark. And every human colony across the system turned its eyes to the stars with grim focus. No one fully understood why. In the conquered Senate, some laughed. Others grew cautious, but most ignored the growing silence from humanity's side. Even when entire trade fleets stopped reporting back. Even when a dozen mining stations near Saturn went dark. The Lumasari thought it was internal chaos. The Etran blamed Earth's economic collapse. The Zoran didn't care until the fires began. It started on Helixis 3, a moon colony rich in plasma ore. A Lumasari-controlled site with over 2 million inhabitants. Surveillance blacked out for 37 seconds. When it returned, the colony was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Not a single body. No wreckage. Just a crater of glass and silence. A week later, a Zoran warship vanished. Then 2, then 6. It was too fast. Too clean. The Lumasari dispatched a scout fleet towards the edge of the solar belt. They didn't even make it halfway before a transmission came through. Grainy, broken, but unmistakably human. You mocked our blood. Now you'll taste what it means to spill it. Still, the stars didn't listen. They blamed pirates, rogue AIs, the unpredictable chaos of space. But the Eldari knew. They withdrew from the conquered, vanished from the Senate. When asked why, their last ambassador simply said, "We warned you." And the stars mocked them too. By the time the conquered acknowledged the threat, it was already too late. Earth had stopped speaking. No negotiations, no ultimatums, just silence. And then, one by one, the conquered's colonies began to fall. Not through overwhelming firepower, but through surgical brutality. Communications would stutter. Defenses would collapse. Infrastructure would fry. Then, just before blackout, one word. Remember. In the ruins of fallen stations, alien survivors whispered of soldiers with black helmets and no flags. of drones that thought like beasts, of weapons that burned through armor like it was flesh. They said the humans didn't fight for resources. They fought to erase memory, to make the stars forget they ever laughed. The final blow came at Varen's Cross, the Conquered's greatest stronghold, a space station the size of a moon, armed with planetary cannons and fleets from 12 species. Earth sent one ship. Just one. It wasn't even large. It didn't fire a shot. It just parked in orbit, broadcast a signal, and then unleashed a pulse that shattered reality. It wasn't a bomb. It was something else. A weapon born not from tech, but from obsession. An AI-engineered signal that rewrote. The station's systems turned against themselves. Artificial gravity collapsed. Hallways twisted. Oxygen turned to poison. Allies shot each other. Starships collided mid-jump, all in silence, all without warning. When it ended, nothing remained. The stars stopped laughing. They called it the Silence War. Not because of any official declaration, but because of how quietly the stars fell. There were no massive armadas, no propaganda, no speeches, just systems going dark one by one. Every species tried to analyze Earth's tactics, but none could make sense of it. How did a species known for internal division and primitive tech become the galaxy's most feared predator? The answer didn't come from the stars. It came from a survivor. A single Zoran scout, found floating half-dead in an escape pod outside the dead zone of Station Vecra 12. He was brought before the Conquered's Emergency War Council, an assembly of rattled generals and trembling diplomats. His skin was scorched, his breath rattled in his throat. But what he said would haunt the Conquered for generations. "They don't fight like we do," he rasped. "They don't even want to win. They want us to forget we were ever alive." The room fell silent. "They come in shadows. You won't hear their ships. You won't see their troops. You'll hear a whisper, then your systems turn against you. Your codes unlock, your weapons misfire, and the humans, they walk in like ghosts." He coughed blood. The Zoran medics tried to stabilize him, but his body was already shutting down. He smiled before he died. "You laughed. You really laughed." That was the last thing he said. The Conquered finally understood what the Eldari meant. The old records had been buried, hidden by pride and polished diplomacy. But they were still there. Tales of humanity's first contact with galactic life. How a small Earthship had drifted into Zalon territory over 2 centuries ago. The crew was peaceful, curious, humble. The Zalon dissected them alive. Then came the retaliatory wave. Not from Earth's armies, they had none, but from volunteers, civilians, hackers, mercenaries, scientists, humans whose only motivation was vengeance. The Zalon Empire collapsed in under 4 years, not from war, but from dismantlement. Entire star charts went missing. Economies were reverse-engineered and sabotaged. Their own drones turned feral. Their AI core was infected with a virus that only responded to one command: remember Earth. And now history was repeating itself. The Conquered had forgotten. They tried peace next. A council of diplomats proposed full reparations, apologies, a renewal of trade, even a seat at the Galactic Senate. They broadcast messages on all known human frequencies. No answer. Then, one day, Earth responded. The message was short. 7 seconds. "We are not coming to negotiate. We are coming to remind you." Panic swept across the galaxy. All conquered species began fortifying. Planets turned into bunkers. Colonies were abandoned. Civilian evacuations became routine. The Lumisari shut down all wormhole travel to human systems and sealed their borders. But nothing helped. No wall stopped Earth. No defense ever saw them coming. And then the humans did something no one expected. They spoke again, but not to the Concord. They transmitted to every child born in the past 10 cycles. Using sleeper signals embedded in neural implants given at birth, they hijacked young minds with a dream. One dream, repeated for 9 nights. A dark sky, a burning world. A voice saying, "You let them mock us. You'll now watch them burn." Children screamed in their sleep. Some never woke. The Concord tried to purge the implants, but it was too late. Humanity wasn't just fighting a war. They were burning memory into the next generation. And the Eldari, watching from the edges of the galaxy, whispered a name that hadn't been spoken in centuries. Aras. He wasn't a general. He wasn't even military. Aras had once been a linguist on Earth's diplomatic team, decades ago, during the Concord's first peaceful contact. He'd watched his team slaughtered in front of him by the Zoran for linguistic insolence. He survived, somehow. Disappeared. And now the Eldari believed he was the mind behind Earth's response. Not a soldier, a scholar who turned grief into strategy, a man who didn't raise armies but created ideas that turned the galaxy's own structure against itself. The Concord Council didn't believe it, until the assassinations began. One by one, the old architects of the Concord, the ministers who'd mocked Earth, the admirals who'd dismissed the Eldari, the generals who called Earth emotion-driven savages, began dying in their own homes. Some vanished, some were found dismembered. One Lumasari diplomat was discovered inside his cryo chamber, frozen alive, with "remember" carved into his skin in multiple languages. None of these kills were done with Concord tech. They were precise, cold, human. And worst of all, every time a murder happened, Earth would send a 7-second clip from decades ago, a footage of the Concord's first laugh at humanity's expense. How charming! They still believe in freedom. Humanity hadn't forgotten that moment. They'd archived it, preserved it, made it sacred. And now, each revenge kill was a grim timestamp, a receipt for the humiliation. Meanwhile, on the edges of the galaxy, rumors began to grow. Whispers spoke of captured humans, those left behind during early battles. They weren't interrogated. They didn't speak. They just smiled. One Concord scientist dissected a human soldier's armor, only to find it wasn't armor at all. It was a neural enhancer, a living suit that synced with rage centers in the human brain, feeding it adrenaline, guiding it through trauma, even talking back. They don't fear death, the report said. They wear it like clothing. That report never made it to the council. The lab exploded 2 hours later. The human behind it? No one knew. But on the walls of the destroyed station, scorched into metal, was a message. We were kind once. In desperation, the Concord turned to war machines. They awakened ancient weapons left unused for eons, planetary siege ships, forbidden AI, bioweapons designed to rewrite DNA on contact. But Earth didn't send fleets to meet them. They sent individuals. One human infiltrated a siege station on the ice world of Gyrax 4, alone, and released a virus that turned every soldier into a replica of himself. Infected with human emotion, driven by wrath, and haunted by simulated memories of Earth's pain. Another woman, silent, nameless, boarded a Lumasari mind dome and collapsed its psychic field by screaming one word: mercy. It killed 6,000 telepaths. No one could understand it. Humanity had no centralized command, no interstellar empire, no galactic navy. And yet they tore through entire civilizations like wolves in a meat locker. Because it wasn't about conquest. It was about reminding the stars who they laughed at. By the end of the third cycle of war, the conquered lost 60% of its territory. The stars burned, not with plasma or radiation, but with consequence. The galaxy learned to fear silence. No alarms, no sirens, just a sudden stillness. And then the systems would flicker, oxygen would vanish, and nothing but static would remain. That was Earth's signature. Precision, not spectacle. The conquered had once gloried in its dominance with towering ships and arrogant displays of power. Humanity didn't need any of that. They had memory and vengeance. Whole planets went dark, not from bombs, but from whispered codes buried inside long-forgotten communication protocols. Human saboteurs, never seen, never heard, slipped through security nets with ease, because those nets had been designed decades ago by conquered architects who thought Earth wasn't worth planning for. That miscalculation became a galaxy-wide funeral pyre. One of the last conquered-controlled news beacons in the Kelith sector dared to broadcast a defiant message. "We will not cower. Let Earth come. We are ready." 17 minutes later, that beacon began broadcasting something else. A human child's lullaby. Soft, haunting, and underneath it, a series of pulse-coded deaths. The names of every station officer, listed in the exact order they died, spoken in the child's voice. They called it the night broadcast. After that, even the bravest alien soldiers began deserting. Not because they feared pain, but because they feared being remembered by Earth. It wasn't just death that came from humanity, it was legacy. Eternal, unforgiving, and burned into digital stone. The conquered's desperation took a new shape. They tried something forbidden. The rebirth program, ancient genetic experiments once outlawed by all known species, now revived in panic. They began fusing Concord species with artificial enhancements, splicing human DNA into elite soldiers, hoping to match Earth's brutality. They succeeded in creating monsters. The hybrids didn't think like their creators. They didn't obey. They didn't restrain their violence. The first batch, Unit Seraphis, wiped out a Zoran fleet during testing. They painted the hulls with their creator's blood and sent a single message out. You feared humans. Now you created worse. And yet, as terrifying as the rebirth units were, Earth still came. But they came differently this time. Not as ghosts in the dark. Not as lone saboteurs or invisible hackers. No, this time they walked into the heart of conquered space openly, in ships forged from obsidian alloys, cloaked not in tech but in silence, trailing signals that echoed with cries from their first contact centuries ago. The first to see them was Admiral Threx of the Lumisari High Fleet. He'd once argued that humanity should have been enslaved when they first entered galactic awareness. Use them or lose to them, he'd said. Now he stood aboard the bridge of the Lumisari's greatest warcruiser, watching as a single human dreadnought emerged from slipspace. It didn't fire, it didn't hail, it just opened its hull and released Aras. He was old now, pale, unarmored, unarmed, wearing only a dark robe and walking across the void with gravity boots. The conquered knew his face. The old records had shown him once, smiling with a group of alien diplomats during Earth's hopeful days. That man was gone. This one didn't smile. He stepped onto the command deck with no resistance. No guards tried to stop him. They couldn't. Fear wasn't the word. Recognition was. Everyone knew who he was now. "You remember me," he said softly to Threx. The Admiral's scales twitched. You're supposed to be dead." "I am," Aras replied, "but Earth never dies. It just waits." "You came here to kill me?" "No," Aras said. "I came to remind you." He dropped a small sphere onto the floor. It opened, revealing holographic footage from over a century ago, humans crying as their peace delegates were slaughtered by the conquered for non-compliance. "I was a linguist," Aras said, kneeling beside the sphere. "I believed in words. You used them as weapons. So now I use silence." The footage flickered, then morphed into every system Threx had ever approved for colonization. Coordinates, names, populations. Every life Threx had touched, all red-marked. "I won't kill you, Admiral," Aras whispered, "but I will erase every memory you've ever made." Then he left. Within 48 hours, every colony Threx had established was gone. Not just destroyed, erased. Terraforming reversed, populations extracted, atmospheres destabilized, star charts scrubbed. Even the AI that documented their existence reported, data corrupted, no such colonies found. Threx killed himself before the week ended. Aras became legend after that. No longer just a man, a symbol. Children of the conquered saw his silhouette in their nightmares. Adults refused to say his name aloud. Some believed he was everywhere at once. Some believed he was no longer human. But Earth knew better. He was what happens when a scholar watches diplomacy bleed to death on an alien floor. He was what happens when you teach a peaceful mind to think in war. Back on Earth, no monuments were built, no parades, no celebrations. This wasn't victory. It was memory. The last Eldari seer, hiding in exile on the shattered moon of Pelenzu, recorded a final message to the stars. "They asked us not to challenge humans. We mocked them. We burned. Now the stars forget how to shine." And still, Earth didn't stop. They turned the war inward, to information, to erasure. Every conquered language? Targeted? Databases collapsed, libraries cracked, cultural archives vanished. It was the greatest extinction event in galactic history, not of life, but of meaning. Earth didn't just want revenge. They wanted the galaxy to forget it ever stood above them. And one by one, it did. Species that once considered themselves immortal now begged to remember their own names. One dying conquered scientist scribbled a final message onto a burnt wall. They are not gods, they are not demons, they are humans, and they remember everything. The stars were dying, and not just from war. It was slower, colder, more terrifying than open battle. A kind of decay. Systems began to fall, not through weapons, but through disbelief. Memory fractured, history unraveled. Species woke up forgetting who they were. Governments collapsed under the weight of their own irrelevance. The humans called it the undoing. Entire planets, once proud and ancient, looked to the skies and saw nothing but reminders of what they had laughed at, and what that laughter had cost. On the broken world of Vel Tarun, an ancient academic center for the Zoran species, the last archivist wandered the marble ruins of what used to be the Grand Hall of Knowledge. All the archives, gone. Not burned, removed. Like they'd never been written. Digital backups were corrupted. Print scrolls faded into blank parchment. Even the language inscribed on statues had become unreadable. When he finally found a single surviving sentence etched into the side of a shattered tablet, he fell to his knees. "Do not mock the forgotten. They are listening." He wept, because he knew what that meant. It wasn't Earth's machines doing this. It wasn't their soldiers or eras or weapons. It was their memory, a memory so strong it had become contagious. A psychological virus spreading from system to system, reminding every species of what they did, and letting the guilt erase them from themselves. You couldn't fight that. You couldn't shoot memory. Meanwhile, Earth remained silent. No broadcasts, no statements, just a creeping presence, a fog that suffocated culture and erased legacies. The conquered tried to unite once more, to stop the collapse, but they couldn't even agree on their own history anymore. Some senators swore they had never declared war on Earth. Some denied Earth ever joined the conquered. A few refused to admit humans were even real. The fear had warped their perception, and Earth knew it. Aras, now hidden somewhere in deep space, began releasing what he called the Remember Protocol. It wasn't a virus, it was worse. Each protocol was a collection of pure data, footage, names, sounds, birth records, screams, tactical footage, massacre logs, all tied to every single conquered atrocity ever committed against humanity. They were released across the galactic network, with no encryption, no filter, no context. Just raw truth. And once you saw one, you couldn't unsee it. The mind couldn't handle it. AI broke down. Organic brains entered seizures. One Lumisari fleet admiral ripped his own eyes out after accidentally downloading a Remember protocol titled Children of Europa, 2144. It was only 8 seconds long. Within weeks, hundreds of billions across the galaxy were infected, not by a pathogen, but by guilt, by truth, by the inability to justify what their ancestors had done. On the planet Dorek, a cultural empire of song and sound, every musical instrument ceased to work. Not from sabotage, but because every coded musical key began playing Earth's national anthems instead. You'd try to play your own music, and your instruments would remember Earth first. The stars didn't just mock humanity, they erased them from memory, history, culture. And now Earth had learned how to erase back. But not everyone broke. There were some still left in the conquered who refused to bow, who burned with pride and delusion. One of them was High Commander Trexel of the Etrin Dominion. He had always hated Earth. Even before the war, he believed humans were dangerous because of their unpredictability. Not warriors, not strategists, but reactors. They responded to pain like no other species. They didn't just fight to survive. They fought to punish. Trexel had lost half his fleet to Earth's silence tactics. His brother died when a human operative collapsed the power core of their primary command base, using nothing but a broken drone and a stolen password. So Trexel prepared for his final retaliation. The Etrin's last shipyard, hidden in the electromagnetic maelstroms of the Nevar Rift, began building a planet cracker, a weapon capable of reducing an entire world to molten fragments in under 5 minutes. It was designed for one purpose: Earth. But Aras found out. No one knew how. He wasn't on any radar, no fleet saw him arrive, and yet one day the shipyard's chief engineer received a handwritten note in an envelope that simply read, "You are building a mistake." The engineer vanished the next day. So did half the staff. Then the gravity coils destabilized for 12 hours, killing hundreds. And in the silence that followed, the AI core of the weapon's control system, designed by the Etrin's brightest, received a data transmission from deep space. The Remember Protocol. Project Harmonia, Human Peace Attempt Number 14. It was footage of Earth's diplomats begging for conquered recognition, pleading for entry, offering technology, medicine, knowledge, promising allegiance. The conquered's response? Human loyalty is a liability. The galaxy does not negotiate with parasites. The AI shut itself down, and when Trexel finally gave the launch command, the weapon exploded in his face, not externally, not from sabotage. The weapon chose not to obey. The galaxy watched the feed as Trexel was swallowed by the implosion of his own arrogance. Humanity didn't need to fight anymore. They'd become something worse than conquerors. They'd become consequences. In the ruins of what used to be Concord's capital world, Delirian Prime, one of the last remaining senators, an old Zor named Velen, stood before the hollowed-out husk of the Senate chamber. Around him, ashes, dust, silence. And one drone. A human drone. Black-plated, no visible weapons. It projected a hologram of Aras, standing beside a pillar of fire. "You mocked us," Aras said, "and you forgot. That was your greatest sin. You forgot we were listening." Velen fell to his knees. "Mercy," he whispered. "Please." Aras didn't move. "There is no mercy in memory," he said. "There is only truth. And we are truth now." The drone turned and left. Velen didn't survive the night. Earth's name was no longer spoken aloud. Species gave it code names like the Shadowed Rock, the Blood Sphere, Origin Zero. They didn't ban the name. They feared saying it might make Earth look their way again. In the galactic ruins, where once proud empires turned to whispers and regrets, some began worshipping Earth. Not as gods, but as judgment, as the ultimate reminder of what happens when you mock those beneath you. And back on Earth, there was no celebration, no conquest, no tribute, just silence. Because they hadn't done this for power. They had done it so that no star, no empire, no smug alien laughter would ever forget what they were capable of when the galaxy turned its back on their peace. They had done it to remind the universe of the simplest, oldest law of all. Don't poke the quiet ones. It had been 15 standard years since the Concorde fell. No ceremony, no final broadcast, no last stand. The once mighty alliance simply faded, like a book left open too long under a harsh sun. Pages bleached, ink dissolved, spine snapped. There were still species drifting across the stars, nomads, scavengers, stragglers who hadn't been crushed directly by Earth's cold vengeance. But they moved like ghosts now, ashes in orbit. Few dared to rebuild. Fewer still dared to dream. Because Earth was still out there, and no one wanted to be the next name on Aras's list. Among the ruins of the old galactic order, some tried to salvage what they could. A group of surviving Zorathi engineers founded a hidden colony on a fractured asteroid cluster near the Graal Expanse. They named it Sanctum. It was built into the rocks themselves, buried, shielded, completely off-grid. They weren't soldiers. They didn't care about war or vengeance. They just wanted to live, quietly, and raise their young without fear of a human dreadnought darkening their sky. For a time, they succeeded. No lights, no signals, no outgoing communication. The rules were absolute. Stay silent, stay hidden, stay forgettable. But silence, as the galaxy had learned, doesn't always mean safety. Because Earth didn't stop watching. It was on the 287th cycle of Sanctum's calendar that something changed. A subtle glitch in the water processing unit, a flicker in the atmospheric regulators, a momentary dip in gravity. Just enough for the engineers to notice. But not enough to explain. Then the children began to dream. Just like during the first waves of Earth's silent war, the youngest began to speak in tongues they didn't know. Old Earth languages, long dead, but now perfectly spoken by mouths that never studied them. They drew pictures in the dust, faces, flags, a tall man with cold eyes and fire behind him. Aras! Panic rippled through Sanctum. The leaders gathered. They hadn't spoken Earth's name in over a decade, but now it lingered like poison on their tongues. They ran diagnostics, wiped systems, purged networks, but nothing worked. The corruption wasn't digital, it was inside them. Embedded in the genetics of a generation born after the fall, left dormant, waiting. Maybe seeded through infected trade goods, or through inherited trauma. It didn't matter. The message was clear. Earth doesn't forget. and you were part of the silence. The Zorathi elders, once proud thinkers, turned to desperation. One of them, Kerus, insisted they send a message to Earth, not defiance, not apology, surrender. But they had nothing to surrender. No weapons, no ships, no threat. Kerus simply wanted to offer their memory, their guilt. He recorded the last moments of the conquered from their point of view. He spoke of regret, of arrogance, of how his species had laughed when Earth was dismissed from the conquered registry after the Europa incident. He cried on the recording. Then he sent it into the void. And he waited. 3 weeks passed. No response. The people of Sanctum began to hope. Maybe this time Earth had decided to spare them. Maybe the memory was enough. Then came the darkness. Not fire, not war, just a full system blackout that no one caused. They lost gravity first, then heat, then lights, then air. The colony systems didn't fail. They were turned off. One by one. Deliberate, controlled, personal. And in the last seconds before total silence, as Kerus suffocated in the dark, a single transmission played across every screen. You laughed. You helped them laugh. You live in comfort while our children burned. Now you'll feel what we did. Not for vengeance, for balance. Sanctum was never found again. Its rocks still float, quiet and dead, in the Grawl expanse. A reminder that even those who hide are still remembered. Elsewhere, across the galaxy, the ripple of fear spread anew. Species that thought they'd escaped Earth's wrath suddenly began receiving transmissions. Not attacks, histories. Earth began flooding the stars with unaltered archives. Every injustice, every broadcast, every execution, every species that voted against Earth's inclusion in the conquered. It was no longer a war, it was a lesson. A living monument to the cost of pride, of superiority, of thinking humanity was too small, too emotional, too primitive to matter. And then, something happened no one expected. Earth spoke. After 15 years of silence, Earth sent a broadcast on all galactic channels. No encryption, no threat. Just Aras. Older now, paler, his eyes sunken, his voice calm. He stood before a simple black backdrop. No flag, no symbol. Just a message. We are finished, not because the debt is paid, but because the memory is secure. The galaxy now carries what we carried. Pain, loss, injustice. It is no longer ours alone. So we stop. He looked off camera for a moment, then added, "This is not forgiveness. This is saturation." The feed cut. Some species believed it was a trap. That Earth would strike again, harder, with new methods. Others thought it was genuine, a ceasefire not from mercy, but exhaustion. But the truth? The truth was harder. Earth had never intended to rule. They didn't want territory, or tribute, or slaves. They only wanted what the conquered had denied them: acknowledgement. And when they didn't get it, they became the galaxy's reminder that every civilization, no matter how advanced, bleeds the same when its pride is pierced. Eris disappeared after the broadcast. No trace. No signal. Rumors said he retired into the mountains of some distant Earth colony, alone. Others whispered he entered a cryopod and drifted into the void. No one ever found out. But his work was complete. Across the stars, remnants of the conquered now gather in broken fleets and shattered halls, clutching fragments of identity and whispering Earth's name like a myth, like a god, like a punishment etched into their bones. The Eldari's last words still echo. Do not challenge humans, not because they are mighty, but because they do not stop and they do not forget. And now no one laughs, because laughter in this galaxy is what woke the fire. Peace wasn't a celebration. Not this time. Not after what had been done. The galaxy was quiet, yes, but not healed. It was broken in ways no treaty could mend. The stars no longer shimmered with pride or promise. They looked tired, like ancient witnesses to sins they could no longer forgive. And Earth? It wasn't victorious. It was hollow. Back on the pale blue planet where everything started, cities still stood. But there were no lights in the skies anymore. No fireworks, no laughter, no parades. The people of Earth didn't rejoice in the aftermath of galactic silence. They watched the skies not with pride, but with grim certainty. They had proved their point, they had reminded the galaxy. But at what cost? In New Geneva, capital of the post-war Earth Confederacy, the Council of Memory gathered once every year. Not to rule, not to strategize, but to remember. It was the only governing body left. Each seat represented a continent, and each representative bore the same mark tattooed on their left hand, a single black tear, etched with a binary code. The code translated into one word: Europa. They said it aloud every session, before speaking anything else, not to honor the dead, but to make sure no one forgot who started it. Among the council was Reedon, the last surviving member of the early defense network. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was a system analyst, one of the first to notice that Earth's trade beacons were being monitored and blocked by conquered surveillance algorithms decades ago. He was the one who leaked the first data package to Aras. He regretted it every day. "You wanted the stars to pay," a young member once said to him. "No," Reedon replied. "I wanted them to see us. They chose pain." But now Earth was left with silence. No allies, no trading partners, no diplomacy, only the remains of a galaxy too traumatized to rebuild. Some believed Earth should reach out again. Try peace, real peace this time. Reedon shook his head every time the idea was mentioned. "We reached once," he'd say, "and they reached back with knives." Still, voices rose. A new generation had been born after the collapse. They didn't carry the same scars or hatred. They hadn't seen their diplomats slaughtered, their ambassadors humiliated, their colonies abandoned to rot. They wanted to explore again. One of them was a young engineer named Naylan. She was brilliant, stubborn, and dangerously hopeful. Working deep beneath what remained of the lunar relay hub, she found fragments of old conquered communication signals, intercepts, ghost transmissions. Nothing harmful, just calls for help. Quiet, barely powered pings sent from drifting ships and collapsing stations. Left unanswered for years. She presented them to the council. "Some of them are alive," she said. "Barely. They didn't all deserve the silence we gave." But Ryden's voice crushed the room. "They didn't speak for us when we begged, when they watched, when they laughed. Don't you dare tell me who deserves what." The chamber went cold, but Nalin didn't back down. "Then we're no better than them," she replied. "If we became what we hated, what did we really win?" No one answered her, because no one could. Later that night, she broke protocol. Using an unauthorized backup signal rig, she sent a burst transmission from the far side of the moon, coded, encrypted, and stripped of all Earth identifiers. Just one message, repeated on loop in dozens of conquered languages. "We are no longer at war. If you are alive, speak." This message comes from Earth, but not its vengeance, only from a voice that remembers too much and wants to remember less. She didn't expect a reply, but she got one. It came 3 days later in a staggered, broken transmission filled with static and echo. Here, still here, broken, scared, but listening. Coordinates followed. Faint, likely outdated, but real. The signal came from a forgotten Concord outpost on Vascor 9, once a major medical hub before the fall. No one had heard from it in over a decade. It had been assumed either wiped out or abandoned. Nalin made her decision without asking permission. She built a ship. Small, cloaked, quick. Powered not by Earth's Vengeance Core reactors, but with a hybrid pulse engine designed for stealth and proximity diplomacy. It took her 7 days to reach orbit. Vascor 9 looked like a corpse floating in space. The atmosphere was thin. The surface cracked. And no beacons pulsed from the once glittering towers. But as she neared the planet, her signal array picked up whispers. Life. She landed at dusk. The skies were violet with ion dust, and the wind howled like a planet in mourning. She stepped out, unarmed, unguarded, and the survivors came. Not many, perhaps 24, scattered between underground shelters and collapsed medical domes. Their skin was pale from lack of sun, their voices hoarse from silence, and their eyes, those alien, once gleaming eyes, were dull and distant. But they recognized her. Not her face, her species. They stared at her like a ghost. And then one of them stepped forward. A child, no older than 12. He didn't speak. He just reached up and touched the tear-shaped tattoo on her left hand. Then, quietly, he whispered in broken earth tongue, "You, remember." Nalin knelt, and for the first time since Earth had reminded the stars, someone forgave it. The survivors didn't hate Earth, not anymore. They feared it, yes, but they understood. Some had watched the Remember protocols. They knew what their governments had done, what their people had allowed. They didn't excuse it. But they didn't want it to be the end. They wanted to begin again. Nalin stayed for 3 days. She recorded their stories, logged their medical conditions, delivered supplies. And when she left behind a single data chip encoded with every memory of Vascor 9's suffering, and their willingness to speak again. When she returned to Earth, she handed it to Reedon without a word. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "One isn't enough." She nodded. "Then let's find more." The council voted, weeks later, not to restore the conquered, not to reach out to all species, that would be reckless, but to begin the archivist missions, a neutral, quiet fleet of small ships, sent not to negotiate or threaten, but to record and connect, to rebuild history, not dominance. Not everyone approved. Some still wanted silence. Some still believed the galaxy deserved to suffer in the dark. But for the first time in decades, Earth wasn't moving forward out of pain. It was moving out of understanding. The stars had mocked, the stars had burned. And now, perhaps they could learn. The archivist missions weren't glamorous. They didn't travel in sleek vessels or fly with military escorts. There were no banners, no symbols of Earth, no announcements of arrival. That was intentional. Earth knew what it looked like to the galaxy. A bloodstain that refused to fade. A shadow over the stars. The face of consequence. So the archivists went quietly. Each ship was small, barely enough for a crew of 3. Powered by hybrid ion dark matter engines, outfitted with stealth systems so advanced they could slip through even fractured conquered territory without notice. Their goal wasn't to correct the past, it was to collect it. Every record, every culture, every surviving language, belief, and memory that hadn't been corrupted or erased by war. They weren't historians. They were witnesses. Nalin led the first wave. After Vascor 9, she became a symbol, not just of Earth's restraint, but of its potential to be more than vengeance. Her story spread quietly through encrypted networks and black channels once used for rebellion. Some still hated Earth, of course, but others, those forgotten colonies, broken outposts, and isolated survivors, began to hope. Maybe this time, Earth wouldn't come to erase them. Maybe Earth would come to listen. The Archivist fleet, eventually named the Morning Chorus, numbered 21 ships, each named after a human colony that had fallen during the Concord betrayals. New Alexandria, Europa's Cry, Carson's End, Valley of Wind. Their names weren't just tributes, they were reminders. The galaxy had tried to erase Earth's past, and Earth had responded by engraving that past into every waking moment of its future. Now they engraved others' stories, too. One mission visited the ruins of the Zayek clans, once known for their deep harmonic language spoken through vibration-sensitive fronds. Their capital Moon had been scorched during the early retaliation strikes, not by Earth, but by Concord itself, afraid that the Zayek would defect out of guilt. Only 27 survived. The Morning Chorus ship. Last light of Terran reach found them in stasis. They awoke confused, frightened, and old. The stasis had slowed aging, but not thought. They remembered the fires, the screaming, the betrayal by their own allies. The humans aboard said nothing. They simply recorded, catalogued, asked gently, shared what Earth remembered of them, their songs, now preserved in reconstructed files from old Concord databases. One of the elders, a female named Cree, wept for 3 hours straight when she heard a human echo back one of the ancient Zayek death hymns. "You heard us." "Yes," the human whispered. "We never stopped." Other species followed. The Krillin, a race of subterranean archivists, allowed the Morning Chorus to scan their shattered record caves. The Dareth, who had once run the Concord's slave economy, surrendered their own history, warts and all, asking only that Earth preserve it truthfully. Not to forgive them, but to remember the whole picture, not just the stain. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The species that had once fought hardest to erase Earth's truth now begged Earth to preserve theirs. Back on Earth, the Council of Memory grew uneasy. Redan in particular felt it deep in his bones, this creeping shift from righteous vengeance to silent stewardship. It wasn't wrong, but it was dangerous. "It makes us responsible for their futures," he said during a closed session. "If we preserve their memory, we also preserve their right to rise again." "And maybe this time," Nalin said softly, seated across from him, "they'll rise better." Redan stared at her. So young, so certain. "You think memory makes people better?" She didn't flinch. "No, but it gives them a chance." He said nothing for a long time. Eventually, he just nodded. But in private, he began preparing Earth's fail-safes. He never stopped believing that the galaxy would turn again. Not tomorrow, maybe not in his lifetime. But eventually. And when it did, Earth would need to remind them again. Still, Earth didn't interfere with the archivists. In fact, they became Earth's quiet salvation. In a galaxy still crippled by silence, where no one trusted anyone, and most communications were encrypted, fragmented, or meaningless. Earth's archivists became the only stable network. Every species began routing broken signals through them. At first, just to test Earth's intent. Later, out of necessity. It was through the archivists that the first Galactic Peace Council in 27 years convened. Not in a palace, not in a great Senate hall, but in a broken asteroid station hovering in the Javalith Belt. Neutral ground, forgotten, floating in dust. Only 15 species attended, down from the Concord's peak of over 90. There was no table, no flags, just circles of seating, and a simple agreement. We do not rebuild what we had. We do not erase what we became. We remember, and from memory, we rise again. They named it the Ash Accords. Earth didn't sign it. They didn't need to. Their archivists had already done the work. But they watched. They listened. They remembered. And from a distant ship, one that didn't carry the Earth flag but still bore the tear mark on its hull, Nalin watched the peace unfold. She didn't cry. She simply whispered the name of every colony Earth had lost, and hoped the stars would never forget again. But deep within the cold shell of Earth's forgotten past, something stirred. An old conquered data cache, buried, broken, discarded, began pinging. It had been untouched for decades. Inside were logs no archivist had seen, not because they were hidden, but because Earth had missed them. The logs showed something terrifying. There had been a vote, just days before Earth's final removal from the conquered. A vote to readmit Earth. A vote led by a handful of young diplomats from various species who had seen the growing darkness and tried, quietly, to change it. The motion had passed. But the results were never broadcast. Why? Because a high-ranking Concord data officer, unknown to most, loyal to Concord supremacy, had manually blocked the signal. One human diplomat, Earth's final delegate to the Concord, named Tyven, had been on his way to receive the vote's results when he was murdered by Concord Internal Security. Labeled a spy, executed without trial. The footage was never released. Now it sat there, in that cache, waiting. Nalin opened it, and the final frame of the footage froze her blood. Tyven, standing in a Concord corridor, moments before his death, holding a data slate that read, "Admission confirmed. Earth reinstated. Welcome home." They had been accepted. Too late. The order to kill had already been given, the silence already rising, the laughter already echoing. Nalin looked out her window. The stars pulsed softly, as if watching. For all Earth had done, for all the blood and memory and fire, there had been a chance, a narrow, fragile chance, and it had been stolen, not by the galaxy, not by the stars, but by one man afraid of change. She knew what this meant, everything that followed, the burning, the silencing, the vengeance, was built on a lie of omission. And now Earth would have to decide, would it continue carrying the burden of righteous wrath, or could it learn to carry something heavier? Regret. It was strange, how the truth didn't explode. It didn't shatter the sky or bring fire down on Earth. It didn't even reach the wider galaxy. The cache stayed quiet, its contents hidden within Nalin's personal relay archives for almost a full rotation after she decrypted it. She didn't speak to anyone about it. Not the Council, not the other archivists, not even her crew, because part of her didn't know how. How do you tell a species that everything it had become, its vengeance, its fearsome silence, its ruthless clarity, was born from a decision that never had to happen? Humanity had burned the stars for a crime that, in the end, had already been on its way to being undone. That truth was a knife. It didn't cut quickly. It sank, slow and cold, into the part of the human psyche that had kept Earth alive all these years, the conviction that what they had done was deserved, necessary, and just. Nalin was afraid to pull it out. So she waited. Until one day, while docked at an old restructured research post near the edge of Concord's ghost zones, she was visited by a stranger. He came aboard unarmed, unannounced, and uninvited. She didn't recognize him, but her ship's biometric scans did. Subject, Aris, declassified. Status, unknown, presumed lost. He looked like death, not in the poetic sense. He looked like a man who had been forgotten by time itself. Thin, pale, movements slow, voice barely audible, and yet his eyes were still sharp, still dangerous. She poured him tea. It was synthetic, the kind that tasted like citrus soaked in metal. He didn't touch it. "You found it," he said. "No question, just statement." She nodded. "How long did you know?" "Not long. I suspected. Too many threads never tied." "You're the reason we became what we are." "Yes. There was a vote, Aris. We were already being accepted back. Tyven was going to deliver the message." Aris looked out the viewport. Beyond it, dust clouds swirled over the broken carcass of an old conquered mining rig. He didn't answer. "I need to know," she said finally, voice trembling. "If you had known then what you know now, would you have done it all again?" He didn't blink. "Yes." The word hit her like a slap. Her knuckles went white. "Even knowing we were accepted? Even knowing the war wasn't necessary?" "It was always necessary." "Why?" she whispered. "Why?" Aris stood. Not quickly. He was old now, bones cracking with the movement, but his presence filled the room all the same. "Because forgiveness delayed is still betrayal?" She frowned. He stepped closer. "You don't understand. You're too young. You grew up with Earth already feared. You never watched our people kneel. You never saw them beg. You weren't there when our brightest minds were dismissed, when our peace envoys were laughed out of the room, when our sick were turned away from conquered medicine because we lacked genetic stability." He leaned in close. "When the galaxy decided we were beneath it, it didn't do so in silence. It did so loudly, with pride, with cheers. That vote you found? That wasn't justice. That was damage control, fear of what we might become if they kept pushing." Nalin didn't move. She couldn't. He lowered his voice. "You think you found peace, Nalin. You didn't. You found a galaxy trying to forget it ever underestimated us." He walked away. But before he reached the door, she spoke again. "Maybe. But I don't want to be feared anymore, Aris. I want us to matter for something other than being the punishment." He turned, slowly. "I never wanted us to be feared." "Then what did you want?" His eyes softened, just for a moment. "To never hear them laugh at us again." Then he left. The decision haunted Nalin for weeks. She didn't know what to do with the information, the footage, the logs. If she shared it, the galaxy would know the truth, and maybe Earth would never recover from it. But if she didn't, then she was no better than the ones who silenced Earth to begin with. And then came the event that forced her hand. A conquered fragment state, the Varen Enclave, launched a declaration of independence, claiming they would form a new power block separate from Earth's influence. They cited Earth's continued silence, its cultural supremacy, and the fear of archival manipulation as reasons. "We remember enough," their leader declared, "and we remember too much of them." It wasn't an attack, not yet, but it was the first step back to the arrogance the stars once had. Nalin acted immediately. She summoned the council. Not just the Earth Council of Memory, but the surviving representatives of the Ash Accords. She called for a universal hearing, a live broadcast, open frequency, and there, in the presence of every surviving species. She played the footage. Tyven's execution, the suppressed vote, the names of those who tried to stop it, the code sent and intercepted before Earth's final silence. When it ended, there was silence. The Varen Enclave's leader, once bold and defiant, simply left the call. Others wept. Even Earth's council, hardened and aged and proud, sat in stunned stillness. They hadn't known either. And Ridan, old Ridan, who had carried the guilt of Earth's silence like a shield for decades, was the first to stand. "I was wrong," he said. "We thought they had left us to rot, but the rot was already inside them, and we didn't see the ones trying to pull it out. He turned to Nalin. You didn't have to show us this. I did, she said, because I'm not afraid of what it means for us to be wrong. I'm afraid of what it means if we never learn from it. The next era didn't begin with a treaty. It began with confession. Earth issued its first open broadcast in 50 years. Nalin read it herself. Not as a ruler, not even as a representative, just as a human being. We were wrong, not in remembering, but in thinking memory gave us the right to silence others. Not everyone turned away. Some reached back. We buried that with fire. Now we choose to unbury it. We offer not forgiveness, but understanding. To those who remember with us, you are no longer our enemy, and we are no longer your shadow. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't dramatic, it was real, and the galaxy responded. Not all at once, not with fanfare, but slowly, deliberately. Former conquered archives reopened under joint Earth supervision. Shared memory networks were rebuilt, not as propaganda channels, but as neutral banks of culture, tragedy, and truth. The archivists were renamed. They were no longer the mourning chorus. They became the carriers, not of pain, but of memory, of both what was lost and what could still be built. Aras died quietly. No ceremony. His body was found drifting in a silent chamber aboard an unregistered Black Ops cruiser, its systems dark, its core cold. He had shut off his life support on his own terms. He left behind one message. If I'd known they were going to forgive us, I don't know if I would have let us become what we became. But I don't regret what I protected. We needed to remember what we were capable of. Now let them remember something more. He was buried not on Earth, but on Europa, where it all began, where the galaxy first decided Earth wasn't worthy. Now his name is etched into Europa's ice, visible from orbit. Aras, remembered and remembering. Years passed, and one day a message arrived, encrypted, delicate, clearly alien. The species was new, unknown, a civilization far outside the old conquered map. They had intercepted old signals, recovered fragments of Earth's vengeance years after the galaxy had begun to heal. They were afraid. The message was simple. Are you still the ones they feared? Nalin herself responded. Her message was sent without encryption. No code, no politics. We were. We can be. But we'd rather be the ones who remember so no one else has to burn again. And somewhere, light years away, a new species watched Earth with a cautious hope. Not because they were afraid, but because they believed the humans had become more than fire. They had become the memory of fire.